Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. I think it's Thursday, but silly me, who would know? I'm having so much fun down here in D.C. All the days blur into one just gigantic, ecstatic expression of fascination with the case of the United States of America versus Joe Biggs et al. Today, we will enter day 55 of the proceedings. However, there will be no jury. And if you've been following the case and you happen to see anything in the news or online last night, what you saw is there was another bombshell of a revelation yesterday. One of my colleagues met with the government to prepare to go over exhibits and issues that may arise during the testimony of the next defense witness, who I will not name, when we were informed, I'd say about 2:30 yesterday afternoon. Oh, by the way, one of your witnesses was a confidential human source, a confidential informant for the FBI. And we're like, oh, well, when were you planning on telling us that? And so we met as a defense team and learned that this person had worked as a confidential human source from April of 2021 until early this year. Just coincidentally, the time the trial started. And when we compared our notes, we learned that this person had been in contact with defendants, potentially their families and lawyers. And so the question is, there are lots of questions, and those questions need to be addressed in court this morning and will be. Among the questions are, what was this person a confidential informant involving? In other words, what were they informing on? Were they informing on the Proud Boys? Were they doing so at the direction of the government? And were they sharing information they learned from the defense lawyers with the government? Were they sharing with the government information they learned from the defendants and their families? And if so, does this result in dismissal of the action because of a violation of a right to counsel or interference with a right to counsel? In my mind, these are all open questions. Some of my colleagues have reached the conclusions that they know the answers. I think we're due back in court this afternoon at 3:00.
That's odd. That's an odd time for court to start, right?
We filed an emergency motion yesterday to request a hearing. The government was initially ordered until 9 a.m. To this morning to respond. They appointed what's a taint team, counsel, to stand in for counsel in the criminal case, to stand between they and us. And that counsel is going to need a little time to make an inquiry and to find out just what the hell's going on over
Whether
there.
the taint may be purged.
Yeah, and so they've been given until 1:00 to respond in writing, and we'll have a hearing at 3. From my uncannily, this echoes what a concern that we raised at the end of yesterday's show, and that is just what the hell is the FBI doing with confidential human sources and the surveillance of domestic groups? The FBI will fight us on obtaining further information about the use of CHSs, confidential human sources, CHSs, their locution, on grounds that they don't want to disclose to the American public information about sources and methods the FBI uses in investigating domestic groups. That's the very topic. Excuse me. That's the very topic of the Church Committee's inquiry in the 1970s, among other things, when it was disclosed to the public just how deep the FBI was in messing around with left-wing groups and so forth. And so now they're doing this with respect potentially to right-wing groups, and it's the same problem. And we mean to press the FBI in these hearings today and potentially tomorrow for answers. Let's see what Judge Kelly does. There's lots more going on. I can't really talk about it because of the rules against extrajudicial pretrial publicity. But the Proud Boys trial is turning out to be more than a trip to Gilligan's Island. It's starting to feel like the Hotel California. Because you can check in anytime you like, but you can never leave.
Well, you could check out too. You still can't leave.
Yeah, no, that's really true. So Freedom Lover asks, how can you possibly get a trial if the CHS wasn't informing on the Proud Boys? Why would he have been in contact from 2021 to right before trial? That's a great question. I don't know. It certainly raises a prima facie suspicion in my mind that this CHS, whether male or female, was reporting on the Proud Boys, but coincidence. It's possible that it was coincidental with something else. I don't know what the FBI is going to say, and so the difference between reporting and opining and proving facts in a courtroom is, from a distance, you can take a look at a coincidence and conclude this is what it must mean. And you might be right. In a courtroom, you have to prove that the coincidence is right. And so the different, circumstantially, it stinks. And so the rule of circumstantial evidence is that you can draw a reasonable and logical inference from a fact unproven. And so in this case, I think the government will stipulate that this person was a CHS, a confidential human source, from April of 2021 until January of 2023. It's reasonable to wonder from where you sit now and where I sit now, whether this person was involved in surveilling the Proud Boys and or their defense team. I think we need more information before we can reach that as a positive conclusion. But freedom lover, I agree with you. It stinks. I don't know how they can get a fair trial. I think what I expect to see is that the government's taint team will argue that whatever the information the FBI had was kept from the trial team deliberately. And so the testimony to date in the trial has been that while the FBI has confidential human sources, it's mindful of the First Amendment rights of Americans to associate with whomsoever they please. And efforts are made to observe, honor, and respect those rights. And therefore, the CHSs are managed and their information kept from prosecutors and investigators absent extraordinary cause. And so there's a membrane between the management of CHS material and the other operations of the FBI. It's a semi-permeable membrane. Those of you who took college biology or high school biology will remember. And what I want to know is what enzymes activate the transition across that membrane, and who controls there, who's sitting atop that pyramid, and how do they make decisions about when information goes from one side to the other. The FBI has been resisting providing that information. I think today's Donnybrook will be whether we can persuade the judge that we're entitled to answers. And what's more, whether we're entitled to those answers in an open courtroom. There have been press inquiries about this, and my understanding is that the New York Times and the Associated Press will send lawyers and or motions to court this morning in an attempt to preemptively prevent the judge from sealing the proceedings. If you've been following the trial, especially early on in the trial, you noticed that there were lots of occasions in which the courtroom was sealed. People were asked to leave, and we were talking about things that I'm not supposed to talk about and therefore won't. And we raised questions about whether this was consistent with our client's right to a speedy and public trial. It was disappointing that the press wasn't there to talk about the First Amendment right to be present in a courtroom. So today there'll be a lot of constitutional hoedowns in the case of United States versus Big. And, I guess I'm happy about it,
Oh, you should be. We've got a couple of people here in the chat. Liberty Warrior says, yesterday was the first time I saw the government side with smiles on their faces, but only when they were with Donald J. Trump. Amazing.
Yeah. Well, let me talk about that. I saw the most amazing thing in court yesterday. These Liberty Warriors been there. It's good to shout out to you. Nice to meet you. It's good to see you in court. It's nice to see a friendly face. So, Eddie Block, a man with disabilities, came into court on a motorized wheelchair with his service dog to testify. And he is a former Proud Boy and videographer for them who would travel with them at rallies and video them. So he had testimony to offer, and he came in with his St. Bernard service dog. His service dog, by the way, is named Donald J. Trump. So after a day or so of testimony and cross-examination and redirect, one of the government lawyers asked if we could have permission to take a picture of the dog because he was beautiful. And so the judge granted that, left the bench, and for 10 or 15 minutes, peace obtained in the courtroom. Lawyers who had been at one another's throat for months, and it has been months now, I guess we're entering the fourth month of proceedings, all gathered around. And I thought, wait a minute, I wanted to get Donald J. Trump on the witness stand. I've succeeded. So I got a picture of Donald J. Trump in the witness stand. There he is with Eddie Block in the background. And for a moment, everyone, there was peace in the valley. No matter what side you were on, what your interest was in the case, there was something like genuine collegiality, and a dog brought it out of us. I mean, that's there's a reason that dog is God spelled backwards, I think, and it was illustrated yesterday in this very, very contentious case. Liberty Warrior, I'll see you there today. Be there at 3:00. We're not starting until late in the day, and it's going to be fireworks today.
Awesome.
So AMA, asking me anything. Mike says, why don't we do that tomorrow? And I've got an idea. You ask me a question and I'll ask you one. So I'm going to ask you one first, Mike.
All right, let's go.
I'm very intrigued by how people make decisions. And as I've gotten to know you, I've come to respect you and admire you a great deal. What I want to know is,
he's buttering me up before he's going to ask me something scathing.
No, I'm not actually. It's a simple question, but it's a question that defined your life. How did you know that your wife was the one you wanted to spend your life with? How did you make that decision? I
think she made the decision. When I was in my late teens, mid-teens, late teens, I was in a period which I affectionately now refer to as the tyranny of youth. As a young man, I had performed extremely well in the classroom. I had performed really well in athletics, and that was a testament to quite a bit of discipline and support from my parents. I came from a divorced family, so I did not grow up with both mother and father in the home for nearly all of my life. However, the one thing that my mom and dad, even still to this day, agree on is me. And for that reason, I'm also an only child. I think that's relevant for this discussion, Norm. I had
no, you're an only child because your parents, as an only child myself, once your parents saw that they'd arrived at perfection, why try again?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, I think that the more that I have reflected on this stuff, the birth of my son did a tremendous amount to heal wounds with my father that I won't go into. But I was carrying a lot of baggage with me into undergrad, and I made a series of really poor decisions that were out of character. I think I was also, quite frankly, run down from years and years of competing in the classroom, academically, athletically.
Tell us about one of those poor decisions. What was it?
We don't
ask me anything. Just one. It doesn't have to be the most embarrassing one, although that would be interesting. But what was one of those poor decisions?
Well, I mean, it's usually involves some amount of fighting or whatever else. And I got myself into a scenario where I hit rock bottom, and that involved me having handcuffs on, right? As a 20-year-old. And
was it police officers who put the handcuffs on, or the woman you were fighting with?
It would be those great officers in the city of Raleigh, North Carolina. And at that point, like I said, I carried a lot of baggage. This is a long way of saying that my wife and I met at a time when I didn't have a whole lot of acceptance for myself or recognition of, who I could still become. And for whatever reason, she was able to see through the facade that I put up. And that's why I say that I think she really decided that her seeing me allowed me to take a fresh look at myself. And we have just grown together. We were, together as of, late 2010, and we went to 2 different law schools. We were together the entire time. And after law school graduation and bar passage, we got married.
You say she decided for you, but Mike, you still haven't answered my question. So I move to strike that narrative, Judge, and I'd ask that Mr. Boyer be required to answer the question I'm posing to him. So ordered. Mr. Boyer, answer counsel's question. How did you know she was the one?
I don't think I ever did, but I don't think I ever cared, Norm. Does that make sense? I don't
understand, because I mean, you've obviously loved her. You've built a life together. You've got a child. You're contemplating more. but she wasn't the last can in the aisle on the fruit juice section. This was someone that you felt something for and with. And what was that something, and how did you recognize it, and how did you know to trust it?
I saw a life together,
Mhm.
and I was also introduced to her family. There was a ton in the periphery, but mine and her bond was unique to me.
Mm.
There wasn't a whole lot of pretense. She spoke in clear sentences, was very direct in her expectations, and it made it easy for me to trust her. There were
Now,
and finding that trust again wasn't something that, I was necessarily searching for, but Norm, I think you and I came of age in two completely different eras. And when I say I didn't really care to compare contrast about who was the one versus whatever.
no,
I
I
think
didn't
it
mean
was.
like you were shopping for a woman, but the trust issue. You say you came to trust again, and you talked about
Mhm.
divorce and divorce from your parents at an early age. How did you recognize trust and trustworthiness in her if you were so wary, given the pain that divorce caused you? Because it does cause pain. At what point did you decide I can trust again?
Again, I don't know that I ever made a conscious decision that I can trust again. I think it was progressive, and when I talk about trust, it was really just from a previous relationship that was really poisonous for anybody around me. My family, my friends, especially me, and uh, I had resolved after that there wasn't really a reason to care that much. I think my wife came into my life at a time when um, all of my walls were down,
Hmm.
and I built them back up with her inside, right?
Right. Well,
I know
all
that's
right.
not very satisfying for you, but it's a much longer story, I think.
Well, we've got time. I mean, don't forget, we do this every day. So, on our next Ask Me Anything, I'm going to ask Mike, were you surprised by the question I asked you last time about how you chose your wife? And what was it that you were withheld? And why? Why did handcuffs come up in the discussion of your wife? I,
That's awesome. No, I don't really, I don't take it for granted. I think that's something that I guard jealously is my relationship with her. And it was something that I fought for, even, even early on. It was something that I knew I wanted. And it was very selfish because she was there. She kept her promises. Um, and she said what she meant, and I wasn't guessing. Uh,
yeah, no, I get you.
and
I
and
get you.
and, and that wasn't exactly what attracted me to her. My wife is beautiful. You can find, plenty of pictures of her. And
I don't want to talk about bodacious tatas here. I want to talk about the person you married. Eye candy is one thing, although she probably caught your eye and then captured your heart. Is that how it worked?
absolutely. Well, a little bit of it seemed like it was happening all at the same time. But what I love about our relationship is that she had her own path from the jump. When I met her, she was focused. She had a plan, and she was successful. She's smarter. She's much smarter than I am, and and I admired that because for whatever reason, I had gotten out of the habit of being around people that pulled the best out of me, and I think that that was maybe subconsciously a very intentional behavior pattern that I indulged.
Taking
Was
a break from the competitive wheel, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as a young man, I started thinking through um, these issues that I had with modern academia. Right, I was very disenchanted with the way that things worked
Mhm.
in major public institutions. I went to NC State University, and that's it's no slight to NC State specifically, but as a freshman, I do vividly recall sitting in the middle of the brickyard wondering where the hell all these people were going and why,
Well,
right?
the prison, methadone clinics,
And
nowhere
yeah,
fast. Yeah, no, I mean, I get it.
so
That.
she helped curve my path back to self-confidence, self-esteem, a recognition of what was important, and then, my propensity to build. I love creating, I love working on things, and I like hitting a point where I think I can't do anymore and then breaking through that. I'm sort of addicted to that, Norm. So all of those things I found in her and more.
Well, at some point we're going to have Mrs. Mike on to talk about what it is she saw in you. What inspired you to think there could be any diamond in the rough hidden in that buried of in that lump of coal? And how's the work of reclamation going? That'll be my question for her.
Yeah, I'll be interested to hear her answer. I don't know that I've ever asked. Anyway, my question for you now. I've got two.
Oh no, the hell with that. No. Okay,
I'm
so let's move on to another topic. Donald Trump. Yeah, no.
Yeah. Well, okay. So when Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, declares his candidacy for president of the United States in 2024, what about his winning message will compel your vote, Norm?
Wow. Well, so I guess the broader question is, what am I looking for in a presidential candidate, whether it be yay or otherwise? Because it's hard for me to imagine. Wait a minute. I'm looking at Eric Dickinson, the comment. I know Mike's wife, and he definitely married better than her. Eric, we're going to be talking soon. Send me your phone number by email. I want to know who this young man is that I've tethered my time to. So,
Eric.
I've been watching Vivek Ramaswamy's campaign, and he talks about a quest for meaning, a quest for a sense of destiny. And I've been harshly critical of Donald Trump lately, and tired of his sort of perpetual "you can't fire me, I can't quit" domination of the airwaves. And so what would I be looking for in a presidential candidate? If I knew, I don't know. I mean, I guess I worry that the republic is broken, that as a result of having followed ourselves into the rabbit hole of identity politics, we've become nothing other than warring camps occupying the same space. If the presidential call that will get a response from me is some sense of our collective vision revolving around something greater than ourselves, and a sense of humility and recognition of sin. So I guess I'm looking for Ye to become the Apostle Paul or the prophet Jeremiah, and to say, woe unto you, who have made gods and idols of yourselves. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and we occupy a limited space with limited resources together. And the task of going forward as American people has to be more than the service of self and the building of castles in our own image. It has to be building a home in which we can all comfortably, but fearfully live together in a world of change. And there is a tradition, a great tradition, a Western tradition, of great books, of religious doctrine, of authors who have struggled in a common vein to come up with a collective conception of right and a common vision of ourselves. And this presidential candidate will stand on the steps of some building and say, I am calling for a renewal of the American spirit. And that renewal of the American spirit comes in a recognition of each and every shortcoming that we have, both individually and collectively, and a determination that starts individually to recognize your shortcomings, accept them in a spirit of humility, to accept the love of your neighbor, and acquire a sense of humble love of self, and a commitment to move on, to put aside blame, the blame of others, the blaming of oneself, and simply to say, I think as I think as Moses said to God when he got the call, and in the Sinai, here I am. What do you want from me? And so I think the candidate that wins for me reintroduces America to a sense of great but humble expectations.
I love that. And, I frame it from the perspective of potential yay voters, because I personally believe that he does represent that expectation of a nation, a certain importance of artistic expression and art that transcends the material, right? Is searching for something greater, something that it seems as though the country has left behind. And I think that he has shown every individual man that you can break down invisible walls at your will.
Hmm.
And is an extra, he's a profile in courage, in my opinion.
Hmm.
So I asked that question because I know that you would give an insightful answer that way.
I don't know if I gave it. It surprised me. I was,
I,
yeah.
I think it was the chat, talking a whole bunch of crap about, hey, this is, Norman might take your questions. but here's the thing. I don't see a whole lot of questions. I do have Thinking Man here. He says, will we have an economy in the future of self-reliance and less government dependency? Or is the future dependent on increased taxation of the haves to pay for the disenfranchised?
I think artificial intelligence is going to organize our economic future, and I fear that it will be an authoritarian future. And the challenge for the left and the right are to find zones of autonomy for the human spirit. And here's why I say that. Since the Enlightenment, we've believed that it was possible to have a rational world, and the development of the social sciences was to discover how best to live together. And so, with Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations and the birth of modern economics, there was a notion that the marketplace, the free market, was the best way to arrive at maximum utility for all. That is, distribution of goods and services in ways that satisfied us individually. And the reason for that is no one person could possibly know, what was good, what the best means of production was. Communism thought, oh yeah, we can figure it out, and central planning failed, and failed miserably, and so it's on the run around the world. But I think AI, artificial intelligence, the aggregation of big data, the ability to solve problems in ways that we don't even, as the creator of the machines, understand, presents us with the possibility of a better world. It presents us with the possibility of achieving something like utility for all, but at the expense of significance and a sense of efficacy. So I fear that most people will succumb to an authoritarian impulse. If they feel safe and they're fat and happy, they're not going to ask too many questions about how it happened. And those who organize the machines, those who organize AI, those who create the algorithms will profit. And many of us will become superfluous, because I believe that it's possible to have to have maximum utility at less than full employment. And so we see now, there's a fascinating story in the Sunday New York Times about a mom and pop restaurant in Phoenix, I think it is, and how a homeless encampment has developed around them and has destroyed their property value. And these are people who are suffering from largely mental illness, and an inability to find a place in the economy, because there is no room for them. We've managed, those who own the machines, as it were, those who own AI, those who own the means of distribution, have found a way to profit and keep most of us happy most of the time, except for those at the margins. And so, to your question, Thinking Man, I think we're going to have to be taxed to provide for those people and to provide for some sense of collective good. And I think the promise and the threat of AI is we can be kept fat and happy, but we can't be fat, happy, and free. And so I think we're going to struggle with this sense of significance and decide, how much are we willing to risk to be free? How much are we willing to say, you know what, I'll stand naked in the wind and run the risk of creating my own world against the very real possibility that I'll fail? And in a coddled generation, people don't want to accept failure. They want recognition. Everybody gets an award, and authoritarianism, whether from the right or the left, becomes the goal. And so I think we really have a fundamental challenge ahead of us. I think AI is going to create the very real possibility of a dystopian future. And then there will be individual acts of resistance in the form of populism, nationalism, or whatnot. And I think that's our future. And I don't know how it plays out. I don't know how it gets resolved.
Well, when I look at the question, I first think that I personally want an economy in the future that encourages self-reliance. And I don't say, limited government or less government dependency just as as some sort of slogan. I do believe in the resurgence of what I'll call the American village.
Mhm.
And I also believe more and more that technology is a false idol,
Yeah.
and that society has wrapped itself around a ghost. And but for that reason, I think there's hope, because it only takes people realizing that they may opt out of that sense of need or reliance on, I guess, the abstract notion of big government standing in for the accountability and the prospect of failure that you just described. My expectation is that whomever steps up to lead America will send that message. And perhaps, thinking man, you unknowingly connected back to my question for Norm, because it does require a cultural force to awaken the spirit of American citizens and to regard themselves in a manner that will encourage risk taking, will encourage them to opt out and stand on their own too, and to have a vision for themselves that does not require them to be subjugated by a sense of collective good. I think that what Norm said is exactly right, and that
Yeah.
is the challenge that we're facing. But I don't know that I'm in any way afraid of the challenge. I think that the real challenge is having the conversations we're having now and getting people in real space to begin doing small things to realize the power that rests within them.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, real things in small spaces. I mean, because I'm watching Vivek Ramaswamy with a great deal of interest when he talks about our longing for significance and meaning and purpose. I think he's right. I'm just not sure he's
100%.
capable of. I've not yet seen him capable of delivering, though, because what he's talking about that within the concepts of big government versus small government, rather than a community of villages, as you put it so well. And I don't, he's young, he's struggling, he's on to something. Let's see how he stubs his toes, stumbles, falls, and remakes himself as we try to remake ourselves, because I think a remaking is necessary.
Yeah,
And, you know,
I think Vivek will be best. He will serve his best purpose. This is just me, stream of consciousness. My belief is that he'll serve his best purpose inside of another cabinet, right?
yeah,
Because he's, as Cernovich put yesterday, you can read the words or you can feel the music. And as between someone like Ye or Vivek may have the words, he may have the fundamental principles, mastered and at his command. But does he have that X factor that you're talking about, right?
yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I don't. I don't see. You and I differ on Ye. You are transfixed by him. I'm just curious. I'm not sure he's got the X factor either. I mean, we've already had one guy who can't. We've already had a couple presidents successively who can't speak in complete sentences. I'm not sure that I want a third. At least not right away. But yet, as I look at the candidacies taking shape for 2024, and it's that season. It's time to start separating the wheat from the chaff. There's nobody that's got me sitting up thinking, "Wow, this is who I will go into battle with." And that's what we want, I think, from a president. We want a sense that this person, whether it be a woman or a man, is a person that we will go into battle with, that we will stake our all on reclaiming a future that we all want to live in. And I think what we're trying to accomplish here in Law and Legitimacy is getting people used to talking in these terms and unashamed to do so. Because there's a sense in which that this isn't woke enough for some, but yet in the heart of every being stirs a sense of a yearning for a sense of place. And in the human life, in the human mind, that's a particularly hard thing to do, because we are divided, in my view, against ourselves. And the notion of original sin or of individual shortcoming, I think, is the defining human characteristic. I don't see animals agonizing over choice. I see them responding. We respond, but we choose, and sometimes our choices are bad. And I think we need to reemerge or re-engage in a national discussion about how to make wise collective choices, and we're not there yet.
Well, and we're watching news about China and Russia, sort of unifying the yuan around the yuan, and as far as close to us as Latin America, right?
Yeah.
So we're barreling into a multipolar world, right? We have for years and years reaped the rewards of decadence based on the US dollar having hegemony on a global stage, and that may be retreating much more than we would like to realize. I think, Norm, we may not even have a choice but to realize what we're talking about in terms of self-reliance. And perhaps it's time, as you've teased before, is the Constitution fit for our times?
Yeah, no, I know there are
Should
problems
we
here.
be organizing and creating environments within which modern men are searching to make it better, right? And not being afraid of the mantle of history with the likes of Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and being afraid to get too close to that stove because we have elevated them in our mind so high up that it seems unreachable. I'm very interested in the notion that things are the way they are, but not forevermore.
Well, on that happy note, we've gone a little longer. As you can see, I'm not in my
I got
court clothes.
one more. I'm okay
Okay.
with a couple
All
more
right.
questions
All
if
right. All
you
right.
are,
All
Norm.
right. All right. Sure. Sure.
Lawyer Will says, "What is the dirtiest trick you've encountered in law practice?" I like that.
Boy, there are so many. I don't. What does it mean? What is a dirty trick? I mean, there's shrewd tactics and wise strategy, and so I don't know that there are dirty tricks. The law is litigation is adversarial, and it's designed to in such a way that two litigants are poised against one another in a competitive enterprise, and the hope is that truth will emerge. The best estimated truth will emerge by having two people go at one another. And so I think the dirtiest trick in litigation is when you play on yourself, and that's a lack of preparation. If your adversary outsmarts you, it's not his fault. So the obvious dirty tricks are lying, or hiding things, and those are unethical departures from the rule. In a courtroom itself, there really are no tricks. There's vision, determination, and preparation, and you either are prepared to meet your adversary's case or not. And if you're not, he didn't trick you; you just didn't prepare well enough. So I think that and so that's the high grade answer. The low grade answer, I mean, obviously people hiding documents, forging documents, these aren't tricks. These are crimes and departures from the norm. And so I genuinely don't believe there are tricks in a courtroom. Some lawyers.
BTL says it sounds like Norm is the one with the dirty tricks.
Exactly what both my left feeling and my right feeling both are hurt. What does that mean exactly? I'm the one with the dirty tricks. Do I look like Richard Nixon?
Here's a more concrete answer that I've encountered, and I would call it a dirty trick because it's not widely regarded unless you're in the mix. The use of litigation finance firms, especially in defense of civil cases, to deny access to swift justice or to right or wrong. And I know that there may be good reasons for the litigation finance industry to exist. I don't want to take too much time explaining what litigation finance is, but suffice it to say that it's no different than some sort of hedge fund where there is money in a pool and there are actuaries and they will allocate funds to various investors, law firms, or clients, such that they can look at the expected outcome and then assuage risk of negative outcomes in trial by just funding a bunch of litigation, whether it's from a defense side or a plaintiff side. I don't want to like I said, I don't want to get too into the weeds with that, but from my perspective, the most startling thing I've encountered is having a case that is probably the most ironclad you could imagine, but not being able to get a finding on the merits because the counterparty has no real incentive. They're not even spending their own money. They're just hanging out and employing whatever attorneys they need to play those procedural games at the federal court level. So
okay, and that's a function of strategy and tactics. I mean, somebody's found a way to finance the litigation and string it out to torture you to try to make you run out of time, steam, will, money, or interest, such that they can settle it cheap.
It involves quite a lot of ethical issues for the practitioners as well, as I've observed. So I think that may be the dirty trick.
Freedom Lover says worst dirty trick is the prosecution not turning over all the documents. That's true. That is a bad trick. It's very frustrating, especially, the contrast between federal civil and federal criminal practice is jaw-dropping. In federal civil practice, there'll be a scheduling order for turning over of documents and completion of discovery. And a party who doesn't comply with that order can be precluded or prevented from using information that is relevant and material because they waited too long to disclose it. I mean, in a federal criminal case, it's just routine to be getting discovery sometimes daily. In the Proud Boys case, there's almost a day. Yeah, well, it's not quite true, but it's not uncommon each and every week to get more and more material. And you get the impression that they're trying to drown you as you attempt to sip from the fire hose. Is that a deliberate strategic objective of theirs, or are they as overwhelmed as you? In the Proud Boys case, I think everybody's overwhelmed with the staggering amount of data. But it is a dirty trick to withhold documents. It's also unethical. So the line.
Lawyer Will shares his. He says, "I had an opposing party that claimed to be sick in the hospital all the way until trial. Then the medical records were mysteriously missing in discovery."
That's just a liar. That's not a trick.
Now for my next trick, I'm going to do a trick.
Now for my next trick, I'm going to become president of the United States. I'm too busy.
Let's see. Let's do one more, Norm. Right. And Lawyer Will, I think you asked another one, but I kind of think I know the answer, so I'm going to go to BTL. BTL asks, let's see, where did that go? Do either of you have any tips for retaining all the information that you both seem to have? Natural ability, notes, etc.
So I'm a compulsive note taker. And so if, just for fun's sake, I'm going to show you a notebook. It's a sketch pad, an artist's sketch pad. And this, without getting too close to the camera, these are trial notes that I take. And so I'm entering my fourth one of these books. I'm up to about 500 pages in the Proud Boys trial. And so what I have found is if I don't write in something down, I'm less likely to remember it. So I'm constantly scribbling notes in the margins of books, outlining things, making lists, and then losing the outlines, not being able to read my handwriting, and having more lists than I can remember, and I don't have a list of my lists. And so the point, you're thinking, well, what's the point of all the writing? And so I think it's just, it's just another way of reinforcing what I think I'm learning. I think when I run into a complex idea, I try to translate it into my own terms so that I can understand it. So, for example, in the law of property, when I took the class, I thought I am never going to do a real estate closing. I couldn't do one now if my life depended on it.
They suck, but they're not that difficult.
Well, good. I'll take your word for it. And so, but you had to take the class. And so I remember, well, what's all this about? And I realized what made it possible for me to get the top score in my property class was understanding the key concept in property: fee simple absolute. There's one form of property ownership that is superior to everything else, and that is fee simple absolute. What that means is you own this piece of property to the exclusion of the rest of the world for all time. And so that's what I think fee simple absolute means. And once I understood that, every derivation, every lesser property interest was simply a derivation of that by altering one variable or another. And so I was able at some point in the class to sit down and on one sheet of paper say, well, at the top of the pyramid is fee simple absolute. And if you take a little bit of this out, you get some of that. And, and on it went. And so the same thing with constitutional law. With constitutional law, my view is the fundamental fact to be explained is why there's what's the most interesting question in the world? The most interesting question in the world is, why is there a world rather than not? How did this happen? Immanuel Kant once said there are two things that filled him with wonder: the starry heavens above and the moral law within. For me, the other fundamentally amazing thing is the fact of government. How did this happen? And so the state of nature is an interesting way to begin. In the beginning, there was nothing. And we created something, and that is a government of laws. And so from nothing, which occupies the functional equivalent of fee simple absolute, from there being no government, we now have this complex body of rules and regulations, and the Constitution sets the overall structure for how that occurs. So that's when I tutored a young man in a pretty good law school in his con law class a few years ago, and before the class began, I had him read Locke's Second Treatise of Government, and I said, understand this concept of the state of nature, this state of there being nothing, and ask yourself over and over and over again in this class, how is it possible that we have this something? And what is the most general way of explaining it? That's constitutional law. So for me, it's note taking and breaking it down into my own terms. Mike?
Yeah, I love the question because it gives us a compliment that I don't know that I'm worthy of. But for the sake of for the stream, I will.
And we make shit up too.
Right. Well, I'll answer it. I too am a habitual note taker. I wrote my way through law school with the small exception of exams. The only way to compete on exams in terms of people who could type much faster than I could write was to type it. Otherwise, I handwrote every single note in every single class all 3 years. So in terms of retention, that is my go-to. I also have pristine handwriting. I could probably monetize that handwriting if I wanted to. Other than that, I would say that putting yourself in a position where the people who rely on you have high expectations is another it's sort of a hack. So this allows me the ability to call back to when Norm and I first began communicating and, slowly starting up with the podcast and stuff like that. All throughout my life, my success has been attributable to finding worthy mentors and doing something well enough that they would take an interest in nurturing that. And so I think that what you're seeing, BTL, when you talk about retaining all the information and things like that, that to me is a mere byproduct of what Norm was just getting at in terms of the bigger picture. Anyone who knows me knows that I am preoccupied, borderline obsessed with the how, the question of how. So there's always the question of what, there's always the question of why, but specifically in the realm of law, how is something I don't think that gets focused on enough, but the how is what allows you to zoom out to 30, 40,000 feet and talk in a way that Norm was just referencing, perhaps, property interests, right, in a pyramid, and being able to see that, oh, okay, maybe a springing executory interest isn't that sexy, but I know it's way further down here than fee simple absolute. Constitutional law the same way. And I think, Thinking Man, you did ask a question about how non-lawyer civilians could learn more about the law. I'll leave the book recommendation to Norm, but just the general approach to almost everything in my life when it comes to beverage alcohol is asking how. You can talk about fermentation, you can talk about these various things, but how do we go from a bunch of disparate ingredients to someone picking up something in a store and taking it home with them, understanding and becoming obsessed with that, and then deploying those retention strategies is how the for me is how the information gets in its proper place, and also makes sense when you start saying it. People have to believe you when you start talking in order for them to have confidence in your ability to represent them. So I just took that mandate very seriously. If I couldn't convince myself, how am I going to convince anybody else? That's
I guess. So Thinking Man, how to learn more about the law. That's hard. It's hard for lawyers to learn more about the law. I mean, I'm constantly walking into legal discussions thinking, what are these guys talking about? And so, I mean, all you learn in law school is a vocabulary and a set of research skills, and your interest will take you in one direction or another. And a guy with a shingle on the street is an expert in helping people resolve the common problems of ordinary living, buying a property, having an employment contract, getting a divorce, this kind of thing. Then there are people who specialize in criminal law, constitutional law. If you want to get a sense of how the law works, my best recommendation is find a journalist who's writing regularly about the law. There aren't many good court reporters. Adam Liptak at the Times, the New York Times does an okay job of covering the Supreme Court, and he makes an effort to break the cases down into their contemporary significance. But we will come up with some more ideas for you on that. I read compulsively about the law, as many books as I can, because I'm still mystified by it all. And I think that it's important when looking at a case, not to get put off by the legal doctrines, but ask yourself what the human drama is. What are these people trying to solve? And once in law school, identifying the fact patterns and identifying issues, that's really what a legal education is. You can walk into say something and say, this is a breach of contract. Oh, a breach of an oral contract. Oh, this is an interrogation. This is an unlawful custodial interrogation. And then, what happens with the lay public, I think, unfortunately, is people learn about cases and they learn about solutions to particular problems, and then they try to apply that solution to situations in which it doesn't fit. Classic example, I think this is the 60th, or yesterday might have been the 60th anniversary of Gilligan versus Rainwhite, the case that talks about, you're having a right to counsel. And so we've heard, the so-called Miranda warnings. You have a right to remain silent. If you don't, anything you say will be used against you in a court of law, blah, 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 blah. Any number of people come up to me and say, I got arrested. They didn't read me my Miranda rights. It's an unlawful arrest. No, it's not. The standard for arresting is probable cause to believe you've committed a crime. If they want to use your words against you, they have to give you Miranda warnings. So I think what people sometimes do is they take the conclusion of a legal case and they apply it to facts that were unrelated to the case, and they're well-meaning. This is an arrest after all, and you usually get warned of your rights when you're taken into custody. But if you're not, it doesn't make it an unlawful arrest. So I think reading broadly, reading about cases, for example, the Alec Murdaugh case in North Carolina was interesting. When you've got one of these
South Carolina, we don't claim him.
It's all south of the Mason-Dixon line. It's all lost cause territory. But get in. If you're interested in the law, something has captured your attention, probably a case. So start looking online and ask yourself who you're learning something from. When you don't, like when the OJ case, he's guilty. You don't want to read that crap. That's somebody who's reached a conclusion. What is a murder? What is a crime? What does the state have to prove? How does a jury get selected? What principles guide that? And if you find one case and you start doing it, you start following it, you'll be surprised how much you pick up.
Yeah, Freedom Lover makes an interesting point, but I don't want to cause too many people to despair, but he's not wrong. The only thing that I would tweak about that Freedom Lover is that the law will change. So
this business about social justice and then, Freedom Lovers, for those of you who may be listening, not reading, if all they teach in law school is social justice, there'll be a lot of us normies that know more about actual law than the generation of lawyers coming up. I've got news for you. When these social justice warriors walk into court and they start chattering, what kind of response do you think they get other than scorn, sit down and shut up? So these are not actual litigants. These are people who work for public interest groups, write position and policy papers.
They sit in compliance departments. They sit in administrative positions in a regulatory agency, that kind of stuff.
But when they want something done, they hire a litigator or they hire a trial lawyer to go into courtroom and actually manipulate the words. And so all the lawyer, when you go into a lawyer's office and you see a lot of books, those are usually reporters. Well, I guess you don't see books these days. I date myself. But the law arises in the context of cases and controversies. From these cases and controversies, a ruling will come up. The court will hold that this party is going to get A, B, and C for whatever reason. And the reason they get it is because of this rule. When those rules become used enough, we get doctrines. And the practice of law is learning to recognize doctrines such that you can advance your client's interest in an actual dispute. It's no more than that. And so for and it's infinitely complicated. It's what makes it a fun trade, even for an old man. I'm going to be 70 in a couple of years, and I'm still learning stuff every day. It's a blast. And so I think from a lay perspective, what you want to get is to the point of getting beyond the actual conflict in a courtroom and trying to understand the rules or the doctrines that the lawyers are using. That's where the action is, and that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. All right, Norm. Well, we have gone almost an hour, totally unscheduled on that one, but I love it. I think we should do this once or twice a month. Like we've said before, and I'm working on, if anybody has suggestions on how locals would allow more than one person to go live without being in the same room, please send those to us. Otherwise, we're going to have to come up with a subscribers only AMA for next time so that we can keep this to those that are with us every day. If you want to find us, you know how to here on Rumble. Please subscribe. If you haven't liked the video already, that's your obligation and your duty. For extra bonus points or a star beside your name, you may go and spam this Rumble page to the likes of like Russell Brand and Louder with Crowder and all these other guys that are getting homepage love and big exclusive deals with Rumble. We need to get Norm in front of them in order for Law and Legitimacy to begin to make a bigger splash. And the fact is, Norm has fresh ideas that in perspective that they might not have thought about. I also think that there's quite a bit of there would be a compulsion to speak with Norm if they knew that he was one of the lead defense counsels in the most important criminal prosecution in United States history to date. So with that being said, Norm, tell them they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, etc. Please, again, find us on YouTube, subscribe, find us on Rumble, subscribe, and then just share us.
Let me get warmed up for this afternoon at 3 o'clock in the Proud Boys case, day 55. I object.
Overruled. What rule? Wait a minute. Wait. What rule?
The rule against your sustaining an objection.
I think lawyer Will said rule against perpetuities.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Because there are certain imponderables in law school, and the rule against perpetuities is one of them. I've forgotten what it is. I remember struggling to remember for the bar exam.
PTSD, baby, you'll never need it. Anyway,
see you later. All right.
See you tomorrow.
Ciao.